Welcome everyone. This is Emanuele Terenzani, and this is IORGcast. That's actually the opportunity for IORG and for our best researchers to share hints and tips about information overload and how to reduce it. So, guest of today is Professor Martin Barif. So, Martin is the treasurer of IORG, right? And he is a professor in a university in the United States. So Martin, welcome to our podcast, and tell us something more, like expand a bit more with our audience. Your role in IORG, and also your role in the field of reduction of information overload and your expertise there.
Yes, I've been involved in IORG very happily for 10 or 11 years as treasurer and a board member. It's been a very exciting time because this is a field or an issue that is really important not only to myself, my colleagues in the university area, but also to many of our industry partners that Illinois Institute of Technology deals with for relationships with students, so that this is something which is expanding in importance because our digital life, with all our devices and our opportunities to look at information which is both useful and sometimes distractful, becomes a very major challenge to look at our tasks and how to balance our work and our home life so that we have a good feeling of satisfaction for ourselves and our loved ones.
So, and today, actually, one of the things we want to discuss is also, in particular, the work and life balance, right? So, and whatever, and what information overload can impact, how it can impact our work-life balance. So, tell us something about your working schedule, right? How busy is that?
Yes, I recall. My father thought that when I became a member of the academic community that I'd be playing golf every afternoon, but I quickly told him that the demands for an academic at a research-oriented university is to teach well, and in the areas that I teach in business analytics, project management, the life is changing for me because the software is changing all the time, so I have to keep up on a dynamic treadmill. My wife is always saying, Marty, why don't you teach in an area which is more static? But the dynamics of software changes and learning new things is very exciting to me, but it does spill over so that more of my home life is spent on learning new technologies that I can share with our students. At the university, I'm the assistant director of the Masters in Marketing Analytics program. So we have a close relationship with IBM in looking at new software applications that come out. We're actually a beta site for many of the applications that will be transferred over into the university area. And I just find that overall, as an academic, certainly I have formal times that I teach during the week, and just to give you some sense of that, each of my classes are 2.5 hours face-to-face in the classroom, but I spend probably maybe 10 to 15 hours for each class. I teach 2 classes per semester. Those 10 to 15 hours are preparation and grading, so I'm constantly bringing work home. Spend time in the evenings or when I'm not teaching, and that does restrict our social life for my wife, myself, our children, and that does have a negative impact. And in some sense, I'm waiting to retire so that I have a better balance of home life.
So, but this is interesting as well when we merge the concept of information overload. So you say, part of your home life is also connected with getting more information for your classes, right? So to be prepared, to bring always something new, to be up to date with the latest research or the latest discovery. So how do you make room for that? So how you are able to, avoid this kind of the overload of too many information that come on you, and so that you are able to prepare, but still without a lot of stress around.
Yes, I try and reserve some space during my days at home or at work, and using a grid, a scheduling grid, time management. So I have 2-hour blocks starting at 7 in the morning, working all the way to 11 at night. And I fill in these 2-hour blocks with tasks that are related to school, preparation, doing homework grading, looking for new articles, doing software testing, and time with my wife. We actually don't have any children at home right now, which was more challenging when we did have children at home. We're empty nesters. But this is something which is puts a significant pressure on me, because I want to be a great teacher, researcher, and husband and father, and it's hard to fulfill all these roles. But the scheduling for time management does help me out. I tell my students that I will check my email twice a day during the weekends or during a holiday, but not to expect me to respond very quickly. During the week, Monday through Friday, I'm checking my email, my work email, that is, very often, maybe 4 or 5 times a day, and my students expect me to respond within probably 2 hours, which may not seem like an urgent timeline, but yet when you have
high importance email are supposed to be responded within 24, so 2 hours is ultra high importance, I would say, right?
Yes. We're a private school, and the students expect a higher quality of action with the faculty compared to a larger scale public university.
And but at this point, so how many emails are you getting? Like, is it a majority of our communication goes through that channel?
Yes, in my work email, I get unbelievably between 200, 225 emails a day. And even though I have filters on this, I do probably have maybe 40 to 50 emails that are really useful, not counting the student messages.
So that is what, 30%, let's say, something like that?
Yes, that seems reasonable. Yeah, some of these are invitations to webinars, to conferences, magazine updates. As you know, the world of technology has many threads that are changing all the time, and I feel it's my responsibility to stay on top of things that I can communicate to my students.
What are the devices you are controlling, and what are the tools actually for communication on top of emails?
Sure. In addition to email, I have text messages, and I really draw a boundary between text messages from friends and family versus colleagues and students. I typically only allow my cell phone for text messages just to my teaching assistant, or if there's a student that I'm working with on an independent study, that seems more urgent at times.
Okay.
But I do have a firm boundary that I don't allow students to call me at home. Some of my academic colleagues permit that, and I feel that when I'm at home, this is a time that I should really be able to focus on work without as much interruptions. When I'm at school, even though I have formal office hours, which are 1 to 2 hours a week, I still tell students that they can always knock on my door, and if I'm not busy at the time, they can come in and chat, or I will tell them to come back in 30 or 60 minutes. Home is sort of my sanctuary, if you will, where I have better time to work.
So, okay, they can knock you on your door, but no SMS or phone calls, so that you might keep your focus. And that is actually an interesting discipline. That is, we also recommended in other episodes of our IORGcast, because the prioritization of the areas and the dividing the job is more important. So, tell me about your how you organize your your day. So let's say you have these 2 hours during the day, you go to the university. So what is the logic you follow in order to decide what to do first, what to do later, and what to choose and where to focus?
Yes, I'll give you my battle plan, you might say, daily, but I do want to provide a caveat that I'm guilty for, that when we're looking at importance and urgency, I get a lot of satisfaction of completing a task. So sometimes I violate my own principle and I do something that is not as important, but I can get it done quickly and I get that feeling of satisfaction. I'm trying to work hard to really not follow that really dysfunctional, pattern. But so typically the way I organize my time on prioritization is I'm always looking at what is happening at the next week's class or the next session's class. What do I need to do to prepare for that? I may have to look at my notes, prepare or revise my PowerPoint presentation, bring in the case material, review how that's going to be presented, and how I can instill some motivation in the students to participate in the case discussion. And I'm also reviewing the software for courses like my predictive analytics course. We spend half the time in class, the 2.5 hours, looking at concepts, principles, and methods, and the other half is a hands-on lab. So as an example, if we're working on decision trees, we will together work a small example of decision trees in class. I can answer questions. My TA is also there to help answer questions for students. And the students will have teams of 2 where they'll work on a larger new homework assignment. So I need to make sure that I go through the software because there's always version updates. I can't really depend upon, say, last year's class and how we worked on an example, because even the smallest little changes can create embarrassments in class if I don't look like I'm knowledgeable and prepared in that setting. So it's basically my teaching responsibilities are first and foremost, and then I will spend some time at school, but more at home, doing work on research. I'm sorry about this phone. And then I also have committee responsibilities. The most important one is the University Faculty Council.
Okay.
I'm a member of, and I also am chairing the Financial Report Committee, which does take time to search out information within the university and at peer universities. And that's an annual report, which I do have 3 or 4 other academic members that help me. But that is a major time sink, I would have to admit. And then I'm also browsing just journals for new information about research, and also practitioner journals to find out what are the engaging issues on big data and big data analytics, which are my primary interest at this point in time.
So while you're working, right? So for example, you just had a phone call, right? And that brought me an idea, right? So let's say a lot of problems is when we are working, and this is an overload, is when we get interrupted, right? So how do you manage the interruptions and how to avoid it?
Yes, well, I do triage my calls so that if I hear someone who's a vendor, typically I will politely say, I'm sorry, you need to talk to our IT staff. That's not my responsibility. If it's a student, of course, I will listen to what they have to say. If it requires an immediate response, then I will interact with them. If it's something that I can defer for a few hours or I need to think about before I respond to them, then I will put that in a to-do list that I keep on a tablet next to me. Those are the 2 typical calls. If I get a call from my boss, of course, then I need to respond and go to his office nearby and take care of whatever the matter is in that setting. But I attempt to try and triage and prioritize the phone calls. And of course, my smartphone is sitting on my desk and I'm looking at text messages that come in. And frankly, unlike my wife and children, I do not have a lot of followings on Twitter because I find that is too tempting to be looking at. So I just have not more than maybe a half a dozen people that I follow on Twitter for better or worse in that context. And I do look at LinkedIn probably every 1 to 2 days to see what is happening.
Okay, so you decide time where you do certain things so that it's more you choose when instead of the notification choose you to read it. So that's the logic. Cool.
Yes.
What is for you information overload?
Yeah. Yes, for me, information overload is having too much input that I can deal with or address in the time allowed. So it's a question of demand and supply, meaning the information inputs and my capacity, my bandwidth to be able to process that information. And that's always a challenge because part of my personality makeup is that I love to explore, I'm curious and see what new things are happening, but yet there's a finite amount of time that we have to devote between work, home, so that's always a challenge.
In what area of our day information overload can be harmful for us? Only in the office or only at home or both, or what do you think?
Yes, and certainly in both contexts. When I'm in the office and I have more new articles to read and I don't have time because I'm looking, I mentioned before, of trying to create this grid in 2-hour blocks, and I need to move on from one block to another, or my emails, which admittedly I get about 200, 225 to my inbox. In addition, I get spam because my filters don't work 100%, so I have to review the spam, although I usually do that every second day rather than every day. And I'm just hoping that I'm not missing anything critical, although in my school email, I have a separate category for students, so I can watch and see what is happening, because those are really the top priority to refer to. So it's basically looking at new insights coming in from my email or any knocks on the door for distractions that had not planned for appointments for students. Those are the major aspects. And at home, because some of my work's over from school hours at the office into home, then I have some difficulty trying to just allocate my time management between school tasks and home tasks. And even though we've lived in our townhouse for about 6 years now, my wife still has a list of things that I need to do to improve things in the house, as well as my own personal life. And one of my real dilemmas is that I would like to go to the fitness center near our home on a daily basis, and that takes about 2.5 hours in total travel and work there. But many times I have to give that up because I've got too much, work in terms of information to process or papers to grade. So that is somewhat of a dilemma or a challenge for me.
And what would be in this case the solution to bring back the time, this time that you miss? Like how would you think you could gain more time for going to the gym, for example?
Yes. Well, one thing is that, and I'm sure others have the same limitation or weakness as me, I often say yes rather than I should say no. And they might say, Marty, can you do the following for me? Oh, it'll just take a few minutes, which turns out to extend more than a few minutes. So I have been learning to say no more, but not as often. Or one trick, if you will, that was suggested to me is that when someone says at school, Marty, can you do this? or in a professional organization, IORG or some other organization I'm involved with, my response line should be, I have to first check with my dean. That automatically provides a cushion where I can think quickly, is this something that is really in my best interest, rather than my impulsive indication to say, yes, of course, I'll help you out.
Yeah.
So I have to remember to put my personal needs before the needs of others in that context, and stick to my 2-hour grid blocks and try not to go beyond that. Of course, having these white or dead spaces allows me to go beyond my anticipated time for tasks that I had not planned on. So that certainly is helpful.
You have a very systematic approach on how to deal with your time, how to deal with information. So I would say it's a kind of a role model that you could, transfer to whoever would be actually in need of it. So I was wondering if you had the chance to transfer it to some of the students, or and how did it work, right? From their perspective.
Right. I see a few times I've had conversations with students in my office where they'd say, Professor Bariff or Marty Bariff, I'm just overwhelmed. I don't know how to deal with all the content in a course. That's the typical question. So I will, sit with them and say, the first thing you need to do is look at the outlines that are in the PowerPoint, and then decide where in this outline you need to, prioritize your time. So I think the major message is really having some sort of a structure, and then put some prioritization onto that structure so you can move through the material. Otherwise, I think some of the students just are overwhelmed and they don't quite know where to start. One of the things that I do at times when the readings are not very directed right from the textbook, but they might be from a series of articles as well as the textbook. So I will give them a reading guide and say, here are the topics and the pages that you should focus on. So I'm trying to not spoon feed them, but give them some framework so they could efficiently address the material, which admittedly sometimes can be overwhelming to them. Students often come back to school and talk to myself and other faculty, as well as making presentations to classes, and we do continually get the statement that they have so much work to do, and the amount of information that they have at work seems almost impossible to digest. So it seems to me information overload really is not formally taught in a course in school in terms of personal skills. We talk about continuous improvement, continuous learning, but we don't really specifically focus in on how to handle information, how to find the relevant information, how to process it, how to store it in categories that are easy to retrieve. And I think this is a missing element that would really help our students.
Why do we still have these missing elements?
Well, I think individuals, and now that we're having this conversation myself with you, I think it's something that I should talk to. We have these ACE and PACE programs that help students prepare their written and verbal communications, and I think it would be useful perhaps if I don't have to be the individual, but if I came in even for 30 minutes and talked about the perils of information overload and some of the ways in which they can positively address this. Of course, Nathan has his encyclopedia, you might say, of all the tricks and techniques for reducing information overload, but this is something which is not formally included, and thank you for reminding me. I think I should really pursue that. This would only be one school, but yet every bit helps.
So now it's, for example, it's summer, right? We're recording this while it's summer, so it's warm, and people usually have holiday at least 1 week during the summer. And how many people do you think keep checking their mails and notification during holidays?
Oh, I think from the media standpoint, they're doing it almost constantly because they're tied to Instagram, into Twitter, Facebook, and number one, they're afraid that their friends will be saying something they're not current on, or where their friends are located at a restaurant or bar, and then the role models, whether they're sports or TV personalities, they want to stay on top of what's happening. So this is a real, challenge, which I think you're correct on. Vacations, weekends, holidays, people are, really tied into that. I'm just going to show you a book of a colleague at Harvard Business School, Leslie Perlow. This book was published about 5 years ago. The title is Sleeping with Your Smartphone. And this gets into our information overload day in October 2018, where the theme is addiction.
Yes.
And how neuroscience and other topics will help individuals understand and try and deal with the information overload.
So talking about work-life balance, one thing to try to get healed from is this addiction with technology that we potentially all have, or at least that tendency we have. Yeah.
That's correct, and I think I'm thinking back to Kurt Lewin, a psychologist back in 1936, had a model which he was describing human behavior or actions, a function of two things: person abilities, personality, cognitive abilities, and the environment. And I think one of the aspects for individuals is that they tend to want to stay connected in this digital world that we live in. And the question is how to try and triage and say, well, what is critical to the prioritization of my tasks. And I think it's very difficult, especially for the younger millennials, to put aside their personal interest to see what is going on at this particular point in time with friends and role models.
So and also talking about this, what's the hashtag FOMO, right? The fear of missing out. It's a significant problem, right? So, but I wonder what you would tell to who is maybe addicted to FOMO.
Yes, I would suggest to them that they think about number one, that they need to put their self-interest first. But what does self-interest mean? There's sort of the social media entertainment, and then also their personal goals related to work and their home life, their relationships with, say, spouses or partners and their children. And they have to decide, am I spending too much time on social media? Am I giving up family life? And is my role model to my children or other partners by spending too much time with social media checking may have a dysfunctional impact upon children and partners. So we have to first decide, is the technology in control of us, or are we in control of the technology? Decide that what is the amount of time that we want to devote to technology mediated social media, because it's a very tempting aspect. For a while in earlier times, maybe in the 1990s, many people were addicted to TV. And when social media came about with Twitters, Instagrams, and people were using their personal smart devices, that it's one thing if you have to carry a laptop around, but another thing when you carry a small smartphone, which facilitates our checking.
So there has been always an addiction at this point, right? Not since the beginning. Like every era has its own addiction.
That's true. Yeah, this is nothing new. And I know Facebook is attempting to try and deal with this. Apple is attempting to have voluntary curbs that one can put the number of hours on that someone would look at. But these are all, again, generated from an individual. And if you don't have the self-discipline, these controls that are discretionary are not going to help you.
That's true. I mean, the negative outcome of being addicted to is not only the keep being subjected to keep checking your notification and so on, but it's also workaholism, right? Like to get to work too much and to feel pleasure for keep executing tasks or just little things and so on, right?
Sure.
So what should you do in this case? You should just stop working or give up, or what would you say?
Well, I think most of us have to work for a living. We can't just get investment returns. So certainly the demands at work are or should be a first priority. But sometimes because the way the economy is shaped over the past, maybe 5-6 years, most people are working not 40-hour weeks, but maybe 60-hour weeks, and that's spilling over into home life, or it might require them to come into work earlier or leave later. So it is putting a challenge, a dilemma upon us, but we're really focused on our work demands, then we need to say, well, it's a zero-sum game. If I have to spend more time on work, then I should be disciplined to spend less time on social media, as tempting as it is.
Yeah. And at the same time, it's not only the less time, but it's also the quality of information that we are acquiring. Sometimes, you might need to do a study, for your research, right? And you spend maybe several hours on social media, but getting relevant information and getting focused, and that kind of healthy, it's okay. It's just when you keep, acquiring and watching garbage information or whatever news that have no point, and you will forget about it, that probably you have a problem with it, right?
Yes, this is the age-old dilemma of, more currently, Nate Silver's book on signal versus noise.
Okay.
But if we go back to Herb Simon, who is an economist and psychologist, he was always pointing out, what are we trying to aim for in our collection of information? Are we trying to optimize some result, or is it a satisfactory result that is something that we're searching for? If we're a perfectionist or an optimizer, then we're going to keep gathering information, and we talk about this inverted U-shaped curve on how much information to gather. There's an optimal amount that we can process before it becomes really overwhelming.
Yeah,
I think this is something that people don't necessarily pay much attention to. They're trying to say, well, is there another piece, especially now since search is so easy with Google or whatever search engine it is, it's very tantalizing to continue to gather more information, and we may be really gathering more information than we need. But if we're thinking, is there that one last piece that I'm forgetting, and maybe that's something I need, we have to be, again, disciplined and say, I have gathered sufficient information to make a judgment or a decision. That really takes self-discipline, which is not always apparent.
Potentially for every single topic, there is a more than one lifetime of content we could digest, right?
Yes.
So there is no purpose in keep researching. You just find what you need and leave the rest.
That's true. And I mean, it's not only external information, but also the information that we gather. Do we have some sort of a structure for the information so we can easily retrieve it? Difference between, say, a formal taxonomy that might be a table of contents versus our folksonomy,
that's true.
A structure that we put together that makes our retrieval of information we've already gathered more efficient and effective.
And then I think from you as a professor, the amount of information we can digest in a given time, it's limited, right? I don't expect you expect your students to get 100% of your lectures. Probably,
yes.
If they get 20% is already a big achievement, I would say. Or
that is very true. And that's why I say at times I will give them a reading guide, or when they ask me, oh, we have so much material in a book, and say you ought to go back to the PowerPoint content, because that's really represents the material that is the most important. Or before a midterm or a final exam, I will also give them a sheet, which are the points to focus on, because I recognize that all the material that we talk about, they can't really, because these are closed book exams, they can't really be able to retrieve that quickly from memory unless they're blessed with a photographic memory, which not many people have.
Yeah. Well, that's. I think the conversation about work-life balance and information overload it's particularly interesting, and I think there is gonna be a lot more to discover according to how our world is evolving. But I would like maybe to wrap up our conversation and say, what should be the main. So to assume, like, if somebody was to our half an hour conversation, assuming that they already got 20% of it, right? Let's reinforce this. So what are the main takeaways so that we are sure that at least those points we are gonna get?
Yes, I have prepared a list of takeaways on a slide, which will be available when this webinar is made available. And I'll quickly review those in saying that we need to be concerned about these workday issues, task overload and information overload. Does that result in some counterproductive behavior, which can make us irritable with our colleagues, with our partners at home? So we need to be very careful to try and, as best as possible, manage these unanticipated interruptions, the amount of time it takes to complete a task, or what is really the culture of our work life. If the organization that we belong to, if it turns out that we're expected to work at home at a amount of time that we're not comfortable with, then we should really say, well, maybe this is not the organization that is best for me and my family, that I should consider some other options. Or if I get too frustrated at work, I might say, well, I just need to go and surf on the internet, or do some personal email, which lowers our productivity, which is not good. So we need to figure out, what are the tasks at work that are most important, although some tasks that are urgent may be easy to do quickly, but we need to keep that importance filter first and foremost. And if you're somewhat of a workaholic, then you need to think, is this the best way for me to gain pleasure? Perhaps if you're a single bachelor and this is your focus in life, maybe it isn't a problem. But if you have a friend set, if you have a family set, then you need to figure out, how much time can you really devote to work?
Even if you're a bachelor, I would say, there are those research. I don't exactly know where I read it, but there was a research that said that if you are live in different environments, like not only your work, but your life is diverse, including, personal life and hobbies and network and friends and things and travel, your own productivity is increasing. Your capabilities in, executing tasks and dealing with things and complex issues is increasing, right? So we don't want, anyway, smart employees, if we are an employer, to only get into a rabbit hole and just do one thing. We want them to expand because they can be better. So even if you're a bachelor, you have nothing else to do and you just have to work 24 hours a day, you don't want that. You're never going to be as productive as the one instead that has other things to do, even maybe just the gym or something like that.
Sure, we know organizations like Google used to give their employees one day. Now it's a half a day, which they can just pursue their own interests, because creativity and innovation comes from free time where your mind can expand.
Yeah.
No question about that. And then a couple other takeaways quickly, that when we're at home, do we really limit or turn off the notifications from work or even from social media if we want to have more time to spend with our family? So this question about information overload really is something that can be under our control if we would just take the reins and say, here are some solutions that I will indeed implement, rather than feel that there's a psychology theory locus of control. Am I the individual that controls my life, or do all the other people and factors control my life?
Yeah.
So we just need to remember that, yes, we all have the capability of managing the overload if we will just look at the possible solutions, adopt the ones that make sense for us, and follow through and execute on those. But it is a challenge, no question about that. I think we've also noticed that the Information Overload Day, October 23rd, is going to be devoted to addiction to information and how that can be a dysfunctional aspect. And I recommend everyone to stay tuned for the formal announcement.
So IORG website is here below. There will be information there. So looking forward for it. And if somebody would like to reach out to you or has any more question, what's the best channel?
Okay. Well, I think my email, as overloaded as I am currently, is probably the best way. Okay. I will include that with the the blog post, but just verbally I'll say that's just Bariff, BARIFF, at Stuart, STUART.IIT.edu, and feel free to start any conversations, or also in the LinkedIn group, if people are members of that. That would be another way to easily approach me.
So thank you so much, Martin. It's been very nice to talk to you. Thank you, folks, for watching, and see you with the next IORGcast.
It's been my pleasure. Bye now.